The world was still young when the first rays of sunlight touched the valleys where the giants lived. The air was heavy with the smell of wet earth. Ferns as tall as houses swayed with the wind, and distant volcanoes growled like sleeping beasts. Life moved slower here, and time felt like a giant's breath, deep, slow, and powerful. Among these ancient beings lived a young giant named Orak. He was taller than the tallest tree and stronger than the largest river boulder. But his heart, though huge, was quiet and lonely. Orak often sat on the cliffs overlooking the valley, watching the small creatures below, early mammals, birds, and even tiny humans who dared to hunt near the giant's territory. To him, they were fascinating. Unlike the giants, who were slow and deliberate, these little beings moved quickly, their lives burning bright and brief like sparks. One morning, Orak heard something he had never heard before, a soft, rhythmic thumping, faint but steady, as though the earth itself was beating with a second heart. He followed the sound deep into the valley, stepping carefully so he wouldn't crush the fragile life around him. There, in a small clearing, he saw something that made him stop breathing, a young woman sitting by the river, singing softly to herself. Her voice was a heartbeat he had felt, not a sound of drums, but a sound that made the very air tremble. She was a human, fragile and small, but to Orak, she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. 4 days, Orak returned to the same place, hiding behind tall trees and rocky ridges, just to listen to her voice. The woman's name was Lira, though he didn't know it yet. She came to the river every morning, gathering herbs, filling clay pots with water, and sometimes just sitting to hum her song. Her people lived in a small camp nearby, and Orak had seen them before, hunters with spears, moving in groups like wolves. But Lira was different. She seemed to belong to the earth itself, her touch gentle, her laughter like rain. Finally, one morning, Orak stepped into the clearing. The ground shook beneath his enormous feet. Lira turned, dropping her clay pot, her eyes wide with fear. Orak froze, afraid of scaring her. He slowly knelt, his massive shadow covering her like a mountain. For a long moment, they just looked at each other, one as small as a bird, the other as tall as the sky. Then Orak did something no giant had ever done. He pressed his hand to his chest and bowed his head. It was a gesture of peace. Lira trembled, but she didn't run. Instead, she placed her hand over her own heart, copying him. That day, something new was born, a bond between two worlds that had never touched before. Days turned into weeks, and Orak and Lira met every morning by the river. Though they could not speak each other's language, they found ways to communicate. Orak would bring her gifts, shiny stones, rare fruits from high cliffs, and feathers from enormous prehistoric birds. Lira would laugh and show him how to grind herbs into medicine or weave grass into ropes. She even taught him simple words in her language, pointing to the sun, the water, and her heart. Soon, Orak was able to say her name. Lira, he rumbled, and the sound was like thunder, but soft enough to make her smile. They learned to trust each other, even though danger was always near. Lira's tribe began to notice her absence and followed her one day. When they saw the giant, they panicked, believing he was a threat. They prepared to attack, but Lira stood in front of Orak, spreading her arms to protect him. She shouted words they didn't understand, but they understood her courage. The tribe lowered their spears, confused but wary. That night, Lira's father forbade her from seeing the giant again. Heartbroken, she cried by the fire, her tears mixing with ash. Orak waited by the river the next morning, but she never came. For the first time, the valley felt empty, and Orak's giant heart ached in a way he had never known. Weeks later, disaster struck the valley. One of the great volcanoes roared awake, spitting fire and smoke into the sky. Rivers of lava began crawling down the mountainside, and the forest filled with choking ash. Lira's tribe were trapped. The fire cut off their path to safety, and the ground quaked under their feet. Orak saw the smoke and rushed toward it, his massive stride shaking the earth. He found the tribe huddled on a rocky ledge, terrified as fire surrounded them. Without hesitation, Orak stepped into the flames, his thick skin blistering but not breaking. He lifted the tribe members in his huge hands, one by one, carrying them across the burning ground to safety. Last of all, he found Lira. She was coughing, too weak to stand. Orak gently held her close to his chest, shielding her from falling ash as he carried her through the smoke. By the time he reached the river, his skin was scorched and his body trembled with pain. Lira pressed her tiny hands to his bones, whispering prayers, tears streaking her ash-covered face. Her tribe watched in silence, their fear of the giant melting into respect. They understood now. He was not a monster but their protector. Orak collapsed by the river, his breath slow and heavy, and the valley was quiet except for the sound of his massive heart. The next morning, the sky was clear. The volcano had gone silent, leaving behind a blackened scar across the valley, but life was already beginning to grow again. Lira stayed by Orak's side, tending to his wounds with herbs and cool river water. Slowly, his strength returned. When he finally opened his eyes, the first thing he saw was Lyra's smile. For a long time, they sat together, saying nothing, just listening to the river and the sound of Orak's heartbeat. It was deep and steady, like a drum calling life back to the valley. The tribe approached, and Lyra's father knelt before the giant, offering him a carved wooden charm, a symbol of peace and friendship. From that day forward, Orak was no longer just a giant who lived in the hills. He was part of their world. Lira continued to meet him by the river, but now her tribe joined her, bringing food and gifts. Orak and Lyra's bond grew into something neither had words for, a love that crossed the boundaries of size, language, and fae. Whenever the valley was quiet at night, Lira would place her ear to the ground and listen. Somewhere, far away, she could still hear Orak's heartbeat, steady and strong, reminding her that even in the wild, untamed world, love was the most powerful force of all.